It's a regular Friday afternoon. You're on the couch, phone in hand, mindlessly scrolling through videos you've already seen twice. And the TV hums in the background just to fill the silence. Everything feels ordinary, everything feels safe, and then the sound comes. Not a notification, not a news alert, a screech. The kind of sound that cuts through everything, through the walls, through your chest, through whatever sense of normalcy you had left. Your television flickers, the wheel of fortune disappears, and in its place, white text on a black screen. A voice calm but wrong, too calm. The kind of calm that only exists when someone has already accepted what's coming, tells you that intercontinental ballistic missiles have been launched. Headed here, headed toward you, and you have 30 minutes, 30 minutes. You sit there for a moment longer than you should, not because you're brave, because your brain refuses to accept what your ears just heard. But then something shifts. A switch flips somewhere deep inside you, and suddenly your legs are moving before your mind has caught up. Because surviving a nuclear apocalypse doesn't start in a bunker. It doesn't start with a stockpile. It starts in this exact moment, when every second you waste is a second you can never buy back. The first thing you need to understand, and you need to understand it fast, is that not all nuclear bombs are the same. The two bombs dropped on Japan at the end of World War II, Little Boy and Fat Man, are the most studied real-world detonations in modern history. Little Boy carried a payload of roughly 15 kilotons, Fat Man slightly larger. Devastating beyond description, responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. And yet, in the full spectrum of nuclear capability, both of those bombs are considered modest. The largest airburst nuclear device ever tested, the Tsar Bomba, carried a payload of 50 megatons. If you placed both side by side on a map, the difference in blast radius isn't a comparison, it's a completely different category of extinction. Against something like the Tsar Bomba, survival isn't a strategy. It's a matter of geography. You either happen to be far enough away or you don't. But this isn't the Tsar Bomba headed your way. Based on everything you can pull up in the next 3 minutes of frantic searching, intelligence estimates are pointing to a 15 kiloton air burst device, essentially identical to Little Boy, which means survival is not impossible. It means survival is a decision, one you have to make right now. The government broadcast is still playing. The voice is telling you to seek shelter immediately. Not a car, not a highway, shelter. The deepest, most reinforced structure you can physically reach in the time you have. A concrete building, away from exterior walls, away from rooftops. And if you're lucky enough to have access to one, a basement, a real basement. Solid walls, no glass, no open vents. The deeper you go, the better your odds. You stop thinking, you start moving. You grab what you can, water, food if it's within arm's reach, a battery-powered radio. You don't know yet how important that radio will become. You head down into the basement, and you close every door between you and the outside world. You check your phone one last time before the signal gets unreliable. The estimated detonation site is downtown, 500 meters from where you're standing. That number lands in your stomach like a stone. You're not in the direct fireball radius. But you are not safe. There's a critical difference between those two things, and confusing them is the mistake that gets people killed. Here's what most people get wrong in these first 30 minutes. They run. Or they try to. They see the clock counting down, and every instinct screams at them to put distance between themselves and the blast site. And in theory, that instinct makes sense. In practice, it gets you killed. By the time a warning has been issued, roads jam within minutes. And even if you manage to break free from traffic, you are now outside, exposed. Mobile and entirely ignorant of where the fallout is going to travel. Wind doesn't follow logic. Fallout doesn't follow roads. You could be driving directly away from the detonation site and unknowingly steering yourself into the exact path where every particle of radioactive debris is going to settle. You would be choosing your own grave and calling it an escape route. The only exception, the only time evacuation makes any sense before detonation, is if you are already tens of miles outside the danger zone and authorities are giving you specific, confirmed evacuation directions. If that's not your situation, you stay, you go deep, and you wait. The 30 minutes pass, you hear it before you feel it. A sound unlike anything you have ever heard in your life. Not an explosion in the way movies prepare you for, but something larger. Something that rewrites what sound even is. Then the shockwave hits the structure above you, and everything shakes with a violence that feels geological. Dust falls, something above you collapses, and then almost as quickly as it came, a strange and terrible silence settles. You are still breathing. Outside, within 180 meters of the detonation point, nothing survived. The fireball consumed everything in that radius within fractions of a second. Temperatures at the epicenter reached the surface of the sun. Beyond that, extending outward to roughly 300 meters, the heavy blast radius leveled every above-ground structure. Not damaged, leveled. The force alone was enough to rupture lungs and stop hearts. At 1 kilometer out, anyone who was above ground and exposed would have been temporarily blinded by the initial flash, then hit by a shockwave strong enough to burst eardrums, and then covered in degree burns from the thermal radiation, a heat blast that doesn't care about distance the way you assume it would. 1 kilometer feels far. In a nuclear event, it is not, but you weren't out there. You were down here. Now comes the part that no one talks about enough. The part that actually kills most of the people who survived the blast. You have 10 to 15 minutes. Nuclear fallout begins descending approximately 15 to 20 minutes after detonation. It is not invisible radiation floating gently through the air. It is physical. It is radioactive particles, dirt, ash, debris that were superheated and launched into the atmosphere by the explosion, cooled at altitude, and are now falling back down like a silent, invisible rain that will destroy your body from the inside out. If you are above ground when fallout arrives, and you are exposed to it directly, you are not going to survive it. Radiation poisoning at high exposure levels does not give you weeks. It gives you hours. The first signs come fast: nausea, intense fatigue, vomiting, and by then the damage is already done at a cellular level. If there is someone above ground near you who survived the blast and is still moving, this is their last window. Get inside, get underground, and the moment they're inside, the protocol is immediate. Remove all outer clothing. It carries radioactive particles. Shower if water is available. Block every air vent, every window crack, every gap where outside air can enter. Seal the space as thoroughly as possible. Change into clean clothes. From this point forward, you are not fighting the bomb. You are fighting time. Because fallout, despite how deadly it is, decays fast. In the first hour after detonation, more than half of the radiation from fallout is already gone. Within 24 to 48 hours, levels drop dramatically, though not to a point where outside exposure is survivable. After 2 weeks, the radioactive energy remaining is roughly 1% of its original potency. 1% is still dangerous, but it represents a survivable threshold under the right conditions. The guidance from emergency management agencies is consistent and clear. Stay sheltered for as long as physically possible. Keep the radio on, wait for official instruction, and so you wait. You are sitting in a basement that smells like concrete and dust and your own fear. The radio crackles occasionally, but nothing useful comes through yet. The food you grabbed is enough for a few days if you're careful. The water situation is more uncertain. And outside, a city that existed this morning no longer exists in any form you would recognize. You understand now that survival is not dramatic, it is not heroic. In these first 2 weeks, it is profoundly unglamorous. It is rationing. It is silence. It is listening to the same radio frequencies for hours, hoping for a voice that tells you what to do next. The structure you're in matters more than you realized before you got here. A fully concrete basement with minimal ventilation gaps will protect you. A basement with wood framing, plaster walls, gaps under doors, and a poorly sealed environment will still expose you to radiation over 2 weeks at levels that accumulate dangerously. You will not know which situation you are in until your body starts giving you signals you don't want to receive. This is the reality. Preparation before an event determines survivability during the event. Once you are inside, all you can do is optimize what you have. 2 weeks pass. The radio finally speaks. The instructions are incomplete, partial. They tell you that certain evacuation corridors are being established, that emergency response is active in zones outside the initial blast radius, that you should mark your location if possible and wait for teams. It tells you nothing about the scale of what happened. It tells you nothing about how many bombs were detonated. And that silence inside the broadcast, that careful silence around the bigger picture, tells you more than the words do. This is where the scenario branches into something darker. Because everything described so far assumes one bomb, one city. One event that, while catastrophic, remains contained enough for governments to respond, for infrastructure to partially survive, for the social fabric of civilization to begin slowly stitching itself back together. But what if the radio never speaks? What if the silence isn't temporary? A global nuclear exchange produces a different problem entirely, and its name is nuclear winter. The bombs themselves are not what triggers it, it is the fires. The scale of urban fires ignited across multiple detonation sites simultaneously sends extraordinary volumes of soot, carbon and ash into the upper atmosphere, into the stratosphere, where normal weather patterns cannot wash it back down. Once there, it begins to do something simple and catastrophic. It blocks sunlight. Not completely, not instantly, gradually, enough that global temperatures begin to drop. Enough that the growing seasons that every agricultural system on Earth depends on begin to fail. Crops die not from radiation, but from cold and darkness. Livestock cannot be sustained without feed crops. Food scarcity becomes the dominant threat, not radiation, and unlike radiation, food scarcity does not have a 2-week half-life. It compounds, it worsens. And it does not distinguish between people who were near the bombs and people who were thousands of miles away. History gives us reference points. Between 1300 and 1800, volcanic eruptions in various parts of the world pushed enough ash into the atmosphere to produce regional temperature drops, now referred to as little ice ages. Crops failed, livestock died, populations declined. And those events were regional, caused by single volcanic events. Without the added variable of destroyed infrastructure, collapsed supply chains, and the complete absence of functioning governments, a nuclear winter operates on a global scale, with all of those variables present simultaneously. If you emerge from your shelter into a nuclear winter, your immediate survival calculus changes completely. Food becomes the primary currency of existence. Whatever stockpile you have is finite, and the environment around you cannot yet replace it. The instinct to find others is correct, but the reality of finding others is complicated. Resources create conflict. Trust becomes a survival calculation. The social systems that made cooperation easy, law, commerce, shared infrastructure, are gone or severely degraded. You are not just surviving nature. You are navigating human behavior under conditions of extreme scarcity. In the early stages, the people who survive longest are the ones who combine resources and skills rather than compete for them. Shelter, water filtration, medical knowledge, mechanical ability, these become the new hierarchy. Not money, not status, utility. The person who knows how to purify water is more valuable than the person who used to own a company. The person who understands basic agriculture, who can read soil conditions and manage a growing season, becomes essential the moment sunlight begins to return. Because it does return, a nuclear winter is not permanent. Scientific modeling suggests timelines of years, not decades. The atmosphere slowly clears, temperatures slowly recover. Seeds that were preserved or protected can be replanted. Animals that survived in sheltered areas can repopulate. The process is not fast. It is measured in growing seasons, in incremental improvements, in years of patient, difficult reconstruction. But the trajectory eventually turns upward. The question is whether you are still alive when it does. You are sitting in a basement right now, or you were. The radio is either speaking or silent. The world outside is either recovering or it isn't. And the thing no one tells you about survival, real survival, not the fantasy version, is that it requires a kind of psychological endurance that is harder than the physical challenges. Humans are built for narrative, for progress, for meaning. 2 weeks in a basement is manageable. 2 years in a degraded world, scavenging, rationing. Rebuilding social trust from scratch. Watching the slow crawl of recovery, that requires something different. A kind of identity that does not collapse when the external structures that used to define it no longer exist. You don't know yet who you are without all of that. The radio crackles again. Or it doesn't. Either way, the decision of what to do next is yours. It was always going to be yours. That is the thing about surviving something like this. No amount of preparation transfers the weight of it. The information matters, the shelter matters, the supplies matter. But in the end, you are the only variable in this equation that cannot be planned for in advance. And whatever is waiting outside that door, it is waiting for you specifically.